Welcome to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. Conversations with interesting people with fascinating stories to tell and from which we can draw important lessons. Here are your hosts, Jamie Serino and Peter Carucci.
Hello and welcome to There's a Lesson in Here Somewhere. I'm Jamie Serino.
And I'm Peter Carucci.
And we're here today with Geno, an old friend. Peter and I know Joe all the way back from college. Great guy, writer, music lover, and now author. So Joe has recently written a book called Lesson Learned, and it's about his journey through the education system being a teacher. Joe has been a teacher for about 26 years. I think all of that in the Bronx. And so we're going to talk to Joe about being a teacher and about the book, which is about his adventures as a teacher, but also there's a lot of advice in there for teachers and for people in education. And as I sort of look through the chapter titles, it seems like anyone that has a stressful job, anyone maybe working with children, I think could draw a lot out of this book. So, Joe, welcome. Thanks for joining us. And why don't you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Well, thank you for having me here. I'm originally from Syracuse, New York, kind of suburbs of Syracuse. I guess in my early 20s, I kind of got bored up there and wanted something a little more exciting in life. And I was also kind of inspired to, in 98, I got accepted to Brooklyn College. I wanted to study with the famous poet Allen Ginsberg, who was a beat poet from the 50s. He was a professor at Brooklyn College, and I wanted to study with him. Unfortunately, I didn't get accepted to the MFA program, but a year later, I did get accepted to the MA program in English. So I moved to Brooklyn, but unfortunately, Allen Ginsberg had cancer at that time, and he was no longer around. So then that started my journey into kind of higher education. And actually, through our friend Pete there, he helped me get into education because I really wasn't thinking about becoming a teacher, like a high school teacher. I was thinking maybe college. My main focus for wanting to study was being a writer.
Mm.
But I didn't know what that meant in terms of like a
More
paycheck.
poetry back then, right? Wasn't it more
Yeah,
poetry?
yes, I was a poet. So even worse because you know if you're gonna be a writer, journalist, a novelist, those people get
Right.
money. Poets really don't get money. But and it's strange, it's strange. I went into Binghamton like that too. Like this is what my interest is, but I'm not really thinking about what happens when I get out.
Mhm.
Um, but it was a good base to kind of try to explore other careers when I really had to like make ends meet. Um,
Yep. Yeah, I remember that now. You reminded me about Allen Ginsberg and Brooklyn College and everything and the timing. Um, so you graduated and then you were thinking, what am I going to do next? And I remember you were in Hoboken for a little while and we were hanging out and then you went to the Bronx and then Pete, maybe you can like fill in the gaps here. So there were teacher openings at the school you were
Yep.
at, right? So what happened?
Yeah, and so I also needed a roommate. And so I said, hey Joe, do you wanna be a teacher? And I remember your first reaction, you were, no way. No, no way. And I go, just come for the interview. Come on. And you go, no way. And then somehow I talked you into both being my roommate and getting this interview with our old principal. Is that right?
yes, you got me right in. And I was kind of desperate because I was working at Borders bookstore in Midtown,
I was
and
desperate.
I really was. In terms of like, getting a place because I didn't have a place, and then getting a wage that'll actually pay for it. The idea of making $32,000 was wow. I was going to have my first real job. I felt like that when I started teaching.
Yeah.
it was funny because the paycheck was like $800 twice a month, and rent was 750. So I was like, wow. But I was like, I was happy, like, man, because I could afford a car and I just paid the bills, you know? And
Nice.
yeah,
So now, what was it when you were thinking, oh, I could be a teacher, but I could be a teacher in college. I don't think I could be a teacher in high school. What
Right.
was going on in your mind that like made you think that?
well, I was always like intellectually stimulated in college. I loved that environment of having lectures, discussion,
Yeah.
highbrow thinking of whatever topic you're talking about. I mean, that's we don't get that so much in high school. I mean, high school is a different level.
Yeah.
And I kind of thought that even when I was in high school, I'm like, thank God I don't have to come back to high school.
Yeah. Yeah.
And funny enough,
You've been for 25 years now.
yeah, and actually 3 of those years was in my high school that I went
That's
to
right.
school at. I
That's right.
was upstate for 3 years, and I got to teach alongside some high school teachers that taught me when I was there. So,
Nice.
yeah, um,
So yeah, I guess there's the thing with high school, like, the kids, they're forced to be there, right? And so you're teaching English, and I happen to be a student that loved English, right? But I didn't really like math, so I was forced to be in math, but I loved English. And so that's part of it. So maybe segueing a little bit into the book and into your experiences, like how do you work with a class like that where maybe only a handful of people really like that and the rest, maybe there's a subset that they're okay with it, and then there's a subset they totally don't want to be there, and that's like your audience.
yeah, one thing I learned early on was I had to develop some kind of relationship with these students who are a completely different generation. They're
Hmm.
coming from a completely different environment, a different experience, different background. And how am I going to develop a relationship? Because yeah, not a lot of them are going to be English majors. So I think one of my tactics was humor. You know, and I also had to appropriate myself into the culture because they talk different, they have different interests. Uh,
And without naming the school per se specifically, it is important to note that you went straight into the largest school in the state of New York, one or two in the nation, in the inner city, in the Bronx, where 91% out of 100 kids was free or reduced lunch, poverty, number one in gang representation, crime, violent major crime. That's what I'm still surprised about. Like, it's amazing you just chose to go into that environment,
Yeah.
And how did you bridge those gaps?
well, I didn't really know exactly what I was getting into.
Oh, my fault. Whoops.
uh, but my attitude was I need to make this work because
Mhm.
well, career wise, I didn't know, like, I wanted to make it work. And then eventually I saw quickly the nobility of the job.
Yeah.
I saw the people who really cared about this teaching high school or administering in high school and how it is important to the stage of those kids' lives. And so I latched on to that, even though that wasn't something that I thought about or was inspired. Like I got inspired when I saw it and I was in it, and then I was like, all right, I can work with like this. This is a good job. Like not just, I mean, obviously teachers like to talk about wanting to get higher pay and so forth, and maybe higher status among society. But the general push to like help kids, like to help others, like to be of service to others
Mm.
is like really important. And it was important for me because up until that time, I was completely self-involved, like self-centered. I mean, I wasn't mean to other people, but I wasn't really thinking about other people either. I was kind of thinking about my own interests, my own
Mhm.
desires. And this was the first time where I had to think of others
Mm.
before myself. And anytime somebody who's self-involved, like, feels like they're on the ledge of something, that you always have to go back to servicing others. And I realized that, and then becoming a family man really made me realize that.
Sure.
Joe, I remember when out of the blue, we started playing a lot of chess, me and you.
Mm.
This is the late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And the next thing I know, we started, you were the advisor of the chess club. And we started a chess club out of the blue, basically in this cavernous old, like, closet that they emptied out for us to have the chess club after school. And I'll never forget the principal going, "You want to do what?" Like, "We're just going to play chess with these kids." He goes, "Good luck." And then we had about 8 to 10 kids. And then we had to go to the library, and you basically had these tournaments. And I mean, early on, I mean, in your career, you started a chess club in the Bronx.
Yeah, chess was when I
It's
was in my
crazy.
20s, chess was I really got into it. I'd go to the village, I would play at the shops over there. Um and I think even it started with Jamie back in Binghamton. If, I don't know if you
Yeah,
remember.
and Item, you may have seen the episode with Item, and I told the story. I think Joe and I were playing chess, and we were getting into it, and we felt like we were pretty good. And then Item comes in, this guy from Brazil, and we're like, "Hey, Item, you play next," and he played next. And I don't remember which one he beat. He beat us in like 3 moves, and we're like, "What?" And then no one wanted to play him. He was a chess genius, right? But he ended up like teaching us a lot as
Mm.
we were playing. So, and yeah, Joe, you really like ran with it.
My competitive juices got going because I hated to lose and I really wanted to learn.
Yeah,
So I got books and I started playing, and I went to tournaments. And
Aren't you an actual ranked master? Is that correct? Or am I
no,
making
I'm not a rank master, but
you're a master?
no, I haven't.
I thought
I
you.
have, but my
That's the
my
story I've
my
been telling
my
people for
greatest
10 years.
achievement is I beat a guy who was 1900, which I think master level is like 2000.
wow.
Yeah, so I beat him in a tournament some years ago. Um, but that's kind of a maybe like, especially when I get into retirement, I might get back to like a habit of chess, and maybe that's on my bucket list to really maybe become a master. Depends on how
Yeah,
it really depends on how much time I want to spend on it. Like
yeah.
I think I can do it, but
Well,
Well,
there's something you said earlier about like being on the ledge and then going back to service, and I think we've heard like some quotes like that before, and I appreciate that you said that, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that feeling. And it seemed like you realized this. You realized that maybe you were too self-centered. You needed to be a little more selfless. And then I think it could be a good segue into what you talk about in the book, because when we were reconnecting, you were saying that you're not burnt out. You're teaching in this very difficult environment for as long as you've been teaching, and you're not burnt out. And that's part of like what the book is about, is how to keep doing this without getting burnt out. So you got being selfless, being on the ledge, remembering service. Don't be, don't let yourself get burnt out. How could you sort of talk about all that?
yeah, there was a chapter in my book that says something like, are you surviving? Are you
thriving or thriving.
striving and
Striving or
thriving?
thriving?
And there's
Yeah,
really a difference. Survive, strive, thrive. And so my early years was survival because I didn't really know the mechanics of teaching. And I had to learn all that because I had no previous experience. Like any teacher
yeah,
today, like they'll do student teaching, go to school of
yep.
education. I literally did nothing when I was in a classroom. And so I had to learn from the leadership. I mean, we had good leadership, and they had a very structural way to go about your lessons.
Mm,
So that helped me, and I ended up getting a mentor, a very good mentor. And so that at least got my feet under me. And but then after that, I had to deal with the system and getting a little jaded, feeling like a cog in the wheel.
Mhm.
And I talk about that in the book too, because you're part of a system with 100,000 teachers, was over 1 million students. Now they're down to about 700,000. Uh, and how do you move forward without feeling like you're just a peon, and what you're
Mm.
doing doesn't really move the ball anywhere.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, I just kind of learned my limits about what I can do and what I can't do. I don't worry about what's outside my classroom
Mhm.
necessarily. I worry about what students are in my roster and what I can do to help them develop their skills. Um, that's one of the main motivations. Like when I'm talking to students, is like, look, you guys just got to work on your skills of literacy, reading and writing. And in many cases, they're behind because reading is not a medium that people will go to. Like they're too distracted by the screens and the computers.
Yeah.
And so for them to put that aside and actually open a book and read, it takes focus. It's a lot slower. It's not necessarily visual, it's more imaginative. Um, and so we got to develop those muscles and skills to be able to do that. And so I understand that what I'm selling is not the most palatable of uh, mediums,
Yeah.
but it's still important. Like and a lot of my students are college bound,
Yeah.
so you need it for college. And unfortunately, and what we don't hear a lot about is we hear a higher graduation rate, but we don't hear about how they're doing in college.
Mm.
And unfortunately, from different publications I've seen, a lot of them, more than half of them, drop out by their second year, and
Wow.
more than that, don't get a 4-year degree.
If I'm not mistaken, you did an actual action research study on trailing them, right? 20 years ago or 15 years ago or something? I mean, you know what you're talking about here. This isn't like conjecture.
I mean,
But
I've looked up different statistics on that. I know that I don't know if it was the New York Times but it has been something people have explored. I just also know it kind of intuitively because we'll hear about students like, what's happening with that kid? Well, he's working at CVS now. It's like,
mm,
uh, I mean, there are success stories, but we want to try to get more of the college graduates. And what I do like about what's happening in the DOE now is that they are kind of pushing. It's not all college talk now. They're at least kind of talking about a little bit more vocational, different avenues of careers, and there's a need there. So
Yeah.
and by DOE, you mean the New York City Department of Education, right?
yes, yeah. Sorry, that was
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah.
DOE. That's New York City teacher talk.
And do you think that I know there's a chapter in your book on discipline? Do you feel that maybe like you have the strength of that kind of discipline to bring that kind of daily dedication in this environment to be able to see it through, or is it more you had to learn the hard way and now after that survival mode and then striving you do you feel like you've been striving or you've been thriving through that discipline?
I've been thriving because I realize I'm working on I feel like I'm working on a different level now, and especially in the last 4 years. And this book really kind of represents that rebirth in me because this book was really written during COVID. And COVID, you
Mhm.
hear how COVID made some people worse, but it really made me better um, in terms of I totally kind of turned around my priorities. I was like 235 pounds and I dropped 35 pounds
Wow.
I really dedicated myself to writing this. And I still do that. I still have a pretty good physical exercise regimen. And um I have a lot, like a routine I follow. And so I bring that into the classroom, like they see it, like,
Wow.
they talk about like, hey, how's your sleeping habits? My co-teachers like to talk about that. Like, how do you guys sleep? And like, oh well, I got up at 4:30 like I do every day. Like 4:30, what are you talking about? So like uh what I've learned as a parent as well, it's not just what you tell them, it's the example that you show
Yeah,
in how you go about your daily uh activities, and habits. So I think they see that in me. Um so I don't get a lot of students who say like, let's just chill today because I got the energy and I set a certain regimen that they're used to. So I think one good indication if you're doing things right as a teacher, if a student walks in and they say, "What are we doing today?" Because then their assumption is, as you've set that precedent, like when you walk in here, you're gonna do something from the time you get in here to the time you leave. We're not chilling.
that's great. So can you talk a little bit about like what you've seen over 26 years, especially with like screens and attention span and
Oof.
like that, I mean, just 26 years, like, so, and you've been dealing with kids around the same age. So you've been seeing this sort of like,
Segment.
yeah, yeah. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because obviously we know there's an issue here. And so what have you seen and what are your thoughts on that?
Well, reading to get them to read was always an issue. But in the early days, they had less distractions. So when I started in 1999, I don't, not a lot of kids had cell phones, and
No. Yeah.
They had pagers back then.
yeah,
Yeah.
they
They had pagers beeping in the middle of the class.
maybe PCs or something. But
Yeah.
so I noticed like in literature study, we did a lot of classics. It was virtually all classics, and they're books that I wouldn't think to teach today. Uh, and maybe some of it is theme based, but maybe some of it is complexity of reading based, or like they're so maybe today they're so kind of departed from. Uh, for instance, Shakespeare. Shakespeare used to be a standard.
Yeah.
Every year we taught Shakespeare. Now don't teach Shakespeare. I have taught it in the recent past, but um I had some kids say, "Who is Shakespeare?" Like that. So that would be blasphemy. If that was 1999, that would have been blasphemy for a kid to say,
Yeah.
"Who is Shakespeare?" Um, but it's interesting because the backgrounds of the teachers and the students. So what was funny is that in when I started, there was a lot of Jewish teachers, and so everybody had a unit on the Holocaust, teaching to Latino and Black students in the Bronx, like the importance of the Holocaust. And I did that. We taught night, and
Yeah.
um, but that doesn't people don't do that anymore. Like I don't think anybody really teaches like that, even so. Uh, but as far as like how the screens have changed things, I think it's harder and harder now for them to even open a book.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, they will try. I see them try. They'll open a book and they'll read a page and they can't I mean, it's not everybody,
Is
but
it like the attention span or just the lack of the skill?
I think a little of both. They don't process the words. They'll read the words and then they don't understand what they
Mm.
read.
Huh.
It's a problem.
Do you think, just this is just me with my educator hat, do you think that a lot of that starts much earlier before they get to you in high school?
Absolutely.
Truth. You can say the truth here. It's okay.
Yeah. I mean, uh, and this is something I struggle with my kids because they're on the screens a lot and we have to try to parameters on it and encourage reading. Um, I'm still working on that, by the way, at home. But they're doing pretty good in school. But um, so yeah, I mean, how young are kids today? They have the screen, so it's difficult. Yeah, with attention span, um, and just the ability to focus and concentrate. There is a discipline there, and what I've been trying to do with my classes is like sell the idea that you need this. You know,
Yeah.
you need this kind of discipline, and you need this skill. Um, and your screens aren't going to help you with this. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you what, it's even getting crazier now. I've been grading different work, like through iLearn. They have like it's like a computer-based English course where they can get credit. And now I have to worry about AI because these kids are
Right.
sending in AI stuff. And I've just
Right.
learned recently how to check for that because
Right. There's
you can tell,
detectors and stuff.
right. And I have to do that now. That's a
Yeah.
new thing. Um,
Well,
but the
yeah,
even
it is. It's interesting because I was talking about this recently. So back in the day, people would be like, "Oh, why are you making me add and subtract? There's a calculator. I don't need to learn that."
right.
And it's less about the learning of that, more about like the thought and the process of getting your brain to think like that and to solve these problems. And now
Mhm.
people are saying that with even with the writing, like, why do I need to learn that? I'll just use AI. And it's like, well, you need that process. You need to learn that process for your brain. um so that's, yeah, so you're bringing up a whole other thing there. And the other thing that comes to mind is to hear you talking. There was this book, I think it's called Deep Work, and it might be like 10 years old now. It's sort of like, kind of right in the middle of all this stuff happening and maybe seeing into the future a little bit. That the book is saying that your brain needs a certain amount of time to do what the author was calling deep work. And if you just spend your time doing the quick things, then you're going to lose the ability to have that focus, that ability to do that deep work that maybe might take tens of minutes or hours. And that could be like reading a book, or it could be like doing research or doing any kind of deep thought, strategic thought. And the author was saying, you run the risk of sort of abusing your working memory by not using that enough, your attention span, and these parts of your brain that kind of dive in. And, so he was getting very biological about it. But it's, since that book's been written 10 years later, the problem, is probably getting worse. Um,
Right.
but it's like related more to your book. Do you have advice for teachers? Teachers are dealing with enough stress, and now they're dealing with this attention span issue. And do you talk about that in the book and have any advice there?
Let's see, do I address that directly? Um, can't remember exactly, but I know just how to you have to adjust to the time. So one of the things I'm doing this year is all my lessons are on Google Slides, so they have a audio visual aspect to the lesson.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm getting away from last year I posted everything on Google Classroom. They're working on computers, and that it was too much because they could just go into another tab, and
Exactly. Yeah.
it's a mess. So now, I once in a while I do have computer days where they'll look up something or whatever, and I'll do Google Classroom. But now I do the slides where I'm giving them a visual, and we're going through it, and they're working on book and paper.
Yeah.
So and it's working well because they're not getting distracted by the computers have been, but also trying to encourage like class discussion
Hmm.
and just reading centered and writing centered. So
Can I ask a really deep pedagogical question in terms of formative assessment? Do you find it's much more difficult now to gauge and assess comprehension, even in that setting today, in the classroom setting, than it has been in years past, simply because of the lack of attention span, and that you have to do much more now in order to keep them on point so you can actually gauge their assessment during a lesson, comprehension, I mean, during a lesson?
Well, I'm thinking back to like this particular school I'm at, like when I started in 2016 and today, and honestly, actually, they might be a little better with being able to like write during a period.
Hmm.
Um, um, they've had a lot of practice of writing, so um, I think no, I think they can do like full writing pieces, and you know, what they might struggle in is development, sophistication of language, use of vocabulary. They're pretty good with textual evidence. Uh, so um, overall, like they seem pretty decent. I mean, there's a variation. I have students who are still learning the language.
Mhm.
But I also have co-teachers that help me to provide them with different resources so that they can navigate through the lesson.
Hmm. Wonder what that's like.
Mm.
You have a chapter in your book, the line between tolerance and intolerance.
That caught my
Yeah.
Having not read
attention.
your book, that yeah, I'm like it excites me to figure out what is Mr. Joseph Geno's, what is that chat, if without ruining the surprise, what, like,
Actually, funny enough, that caught my eye too, and I was looking through it, and I didn't really, I didn't even know where I didn't even look at it good. Um, but I think what it was about was I struggled early on with classroom management. Um,
mm,
administrators would criticize me as being, what's the one guy? Oh, he said I had a relaxed approach. So I was
Sure.
kind of the cool teacher. Um, but in reality, if I'm reflecting back on it, I was too tolerant of nonsense. Um, and in certain classes, it didn't work out well. Uh,
so that chapter's about like classroom
yeah,
management, like intolerance versus tolerance, and that kind of like, okay.
right. And
Wow.
I've never
Tolerating
been a
monkey
rigid.
business.
Right, right. I've never been a rigid teacher, but I think I've learned to where I want to hold the line with that, um, so that I can still perhaps not hurt my relationship with students, but also be able to get what I need to get done. Um, and so, and I think that lack of rigidity has actually helped me with my longevity because uh, I don't take it home with me. Like I don't. It's there's been times where maybe I haven't been as rigid as I need to be, or I'm not handling this particular student or class the way I need to in the past. And I've gotten the criticism for that. But I I'm I was able to kind of transform myself and try to learn from it. And you know, I think I'm in a good place now. But it took a while for me. Some
How
people are
does
just
yeah, how does a beginner teacher overcome that? Because I feel like I'm not surprised to hear that you struggled with that. I think both just being I think any beginner teacher and also you are like a calm, kind of mellow person and more intellectually driven by the material, right? Um
right.
so what is your
Well,
advice
it
for that
kind of
beginner
depends on.
teacher?
Well, some teachers don't struggle with that. Like they have a personality as such that they just walk in and command a room. And
Mhm.
actually, my co-teachers are in their late 20s, early 30s, and I don't think they don't have a problem with that because they got strong voices. They're very forceful,
Mm.
but also they're they can get relationships with students as well. So it was a particular issue for me, because and that's maybe one of my instinctual reasons why I didn't want to teach high school, because
Right.
I kind of knew that that was going to be an issue for me. Um, what helped me early on was just learning the structure of a lesson and keeping them busy. Um, that helped maybe curtail a lot of the problems of students acting out or whatever.
Yeah.
But even with that, then they would, and then you still have to address it as a teacher.
Yep.
Um, and so that was just a experience for me, like a long experience to try to see how am I going to deal with different students. And when you become an experienced enough teacher, you can fit students within a profile. Like, oh, I had this student, this kid right here, this is just like this kid I had 5 years ago. And this is what I did for
Mm.
that kid. Um, so it's interesting to kind of how students fit within a profile, and then you can like kind of almost scientifically uh,
Well, you're talking about their learning profile, like whatever modalities seem to work with Johnny 5 years ago, you can bring out and it might work with another student. That's very useful stuff, you know? Um, we were talking earlier before this recording about a certain large number of young teachers leaving within like 5 years.
Mm.
And I think the strength of a book like yours kind of empowers and sets out, like if you had that book or if I had that book 25, 30 years ago, we would be like, okay, all right, because you're even getting into retirement and when to retire and like,
Yeah.
myths about teaching that, look, if that's what you really think happens, it's not going to happen. Like my mother was a Catholic school principal and she needed a substitute teacher. And so I went in to substitute teach her seventh grade class for like a week,
mm,
something I will never do again. And it taught me so much in those like 5 school days that I
Mm.
never wanted to, ever encounter seventh grade class again, because back then, we didn't know what we were going to, we didn't know what we were going to do with our lives. Now, if I had your book as a young teacher, are there things in there that I can find value in that would help me?
that's you're asking that?
Yeah.
Yes. Um, yeah, absolutely. I think I start off with talking about success and how a teacher is a successful position, just to begin with. But then there is a process in which you have to acquire like a greater success. So the job itself is noble, but then you have to learn how to be effective in it.
Mm.
And then I think part of that, if you want to last as a teacher, it's all about your attitude and your how you approach, because how you approach different situations. So um, there are many challenges. Like I was saying, like things that make you feel small or ineffective. Um, but you can overcome that, and try to uh, you know experience makes you better, basically.
And I was with you for, I mean, I spent basically a quarter of my life probably with you in that environment. And to your point, everything would be going great and things are okay. And then all of a sudden, New York State says, we're going to bring in this new evaluation system. And then New York State embraces the Common Core curriculum. So all these things that have been going well, now you have to redo all of the curriculum and spend all these hours regenerating this, and then new teachers have to get a new classes every year and update their certification requirements, and then all of a sudden this rubric will change and this can't happen, and this top down structure. I know on a teacher who's literally with the salt of the earth in the classroom trying to elevate, in your case, some of the poorest kids in the United States. in the world and trying to help them out. And all of a sudden, you have this thing come down on you, and you have to,
Yeah.
respond immediately. How do
I
you?
get into that. I get into that, especially, and this really came with like the Bloomberg era of kind of teacher accountability and this
Mhm.
new word that we kept hearing called the four-letter word in education
It's a good book.
called data. Data. We never heard data before, but now all of a sudden we were hearing data, and they were using it as in a kind of business model to hold teachers accountable. And the assumption was if you were in a school with, say, 50% graduation rate, there's no way that you have a school full of good teachers, because if you had a school full of good teachers, then you wouldn't have a 50% graduation rate. So they tried to put it all on the teachers. They did different things to kind of attack us. There was a bunch of closures and kind of shrinking schools down. I re-interviewed for my job twice, which was funny because you meet the principal and then they introduce themselves to you, and that's like I already know who you are, you know. But so it was kind of it was a strange era in education because um, before that we were told we were given a lot of positive feedback by our administration. We were encouraged. We felt good about going to school. And then when this new era of teacher accountability came in, we were made to feel bad about our jobs. We were feeling attacked. And and you could tell the fakery of it all because how you use data. I mean, what's the Mark Twain quote? There's lies, damned lies in statistics. And that's what they were using it. They were using the data against us. So, they would pat themselves on the back if they had an increased graduation rate, but nobody on the outside ever looked into how did you get those numbers? How did you get those students to pass the test or get those credits? Um, you know, as far as the mayor and the upper administration was concerned, it was all about we got better numbers, we're doing better, the system's better. But us, those of us in the system, understood that it was manipulated. It wasn't real. And having gone through all that, I really appreciate now being in the system because we're not really being attacked like that. My school is in pretty good standing. It's in good standing. So there's no threat of closure. We don't have quality review. Like, do we have quality reviews? I remember, like, we used to have quality reviews where an outside administrator would come into school and it was like, you know,
A
the,
team.
the janitors were cleaning the lockers that they didn't do all year, like it was just so like a fake, like, show that was to be put on, right? And we had to get a unit plan, or something that we never did, but they want to see it and blah, blah, blah. And so we don't get a lot of that anymore, which feels good. It's just kind of, I guess there's less of a top-down push, even though this current administration does have some Bloomberg people, but they're not pushing like they used to.
That gives you a little more autonomy in the classroom, a little more control over your own environment. Do you feel more like capable of success that way?
I do, yes, but there is some push for like they are introducing new curriculum. Like I guess the one this year is the math curriculum where they're kind of giving like a universal curriculum, which goes against their old message of differentiating lessons to different students. Now apparently they want everybody teaching the same curriculum. And that was one of my complaints with gathering data for teachers because there's a variability in the students you have. Like you're gonna compare a teacher of like an AP class to a self-contained special ed class, or you're gonna compare a college level um, honors class to someone who's teaching an ESL class. Like those students have completely different skills, and
And needs. Yeah.
yeah. And see what they do, Jamie, is they have what they call a Mosul, which is they rate teachers based on the state standardized tests. And the original idea was to use, like, say, my students taking the English regions, state regions, see what they do on the test, and then that's part of my score in addition to the observations I get from the principal. Um, but now they've kind of there's different ways to do it, but now our school, we generalize it. So basically, all tests are the teachers are scored by all tests by all students, because you can't really go by just like a particular test. Like, what do you do for an art teacher? There's no state
Right.
art test. There's no gym state test. So
Right.
it's difficult to measure. Like, I compare it to, say, you could go into a car dealership and you can find out who the best salesman is. Easy. Who sold the most cars? Or real estate, right? Who sold the most houses? You can tell who the best is. But in education, it's not so easy, because you're dealing with different populations, and the measurements are like how they do on the tests is not always like a decent marker on their
Yeah,
abilities.
and I think, testing becomes a huge topic because you brought up differentiation, and we have talked a little bit about culture and the makeup of the students in the Bronx. And so, could you talk a little bit about that? That how your school needs to sort of focus on that population, and it does sound like it's difficult putting it on this sort of national average, and there's a lot of literature out there about how the testing ends up being it skews towards the predominant culture in the country, right? The testing itself,
Yeah.
and I don't know if the curriculum does. So if you could talk a little bit about that, because it's so pronounced, I think,
Mm.
what the culture is there at your school.
Yeah, I mean, the demographic makeup of my school, I'm in the South Bronx. It's about maybe 60 to 70% Latino, 20% plus percent African American or Caribbean, or like, we have a good amount of students from Africa, like first generation African
Hmm.
immigrants, and then a few Asians, but really you have no Caucasian population.
Hmm.
Uh, And, this is something that we've always struggled with in the education field, the achievement gap between the different demographic groups. Uh, but I mean, I just focus on what my students need. Um, it's interesting. When I taught upstate, I had a virtually 100% Regents passing score. But I don't give myself a lot of credit for that, because it felt like they had the skills when they walked in.
Mm.
Um, uh, so, I mean, as a city teacher, you have to, because the students are maybe behind, you have to work a little harder to try to get them up to where they need to be.
Yeah.
Um, and it's not easy, but you realize, like, they're totally capable. It's like they can they can achieve, but you understand also, like, when they walk into my room, they're 18 years old, so they've lived a whole childhood, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, so I understand, as a 12th grade teacher, I got 10 months to get them to, get better, but I'm not a miracle worker either. Uh, and there's things that happen in their life where, you're not gonna get a lot out of them. I've had students whose parents died, or, they're going through a lot of stuff, or they're living in a shelter.
Mhm.
So, uh, my motto has always been, you do the best with what you have. in terms of resources, in terms of what you're able to do in that time frame. But I work off the assumption that they're fully capable, can get them to where they, for most part, where they want to grad. For me, it's for graduation,
Yep.
and virtually all of them get accepted to some college. So I want to like make sure they're not taking 12th grade off and they're really
Yeah.
kind of working because some of them, like one of the issues in my school is that we're a trimester school, and that means that students can get 3 credits a year, and they only need 8 credits to graduate. So if they've passed all their classes, they walk into my classroom with 9 English credits. Like they don't need my class to
Right.
graduate.
Right.
And so again, I got to make this argument to them like, look, I know you don't necessarily need the credit, but you can use it for an elective. Maybe you need an elective. And you can't take a year off and expect to go on a college campus and like do well, you know?
Yeah.
Uh, so that's my kind of pitch.
Yeah. Well, you said earlier that you were selling something, and it is funny, and so I do see how initially you would have resisted that because it's not in your nature to go and sell something. If you want it, you want it. But then you became a little bit of a salesperson for
Yeah,
English.
that was another part of my problem, like maybe with the management piece and even helping students progress is like I do believe I still kind of hold on to this idea that you can't give somebody an education, you all you can do is offer it to them.
Hmm.
And so it's a two-way street. They have to accept it and they have to move forward with it. They have to have their own motivation.
Hmm.
Now, I've seen the extreme with this, like old school teachers who I've walked by their classroom and they're just like, especially upstate, these are like conservative guys, and they'll be like, yo, this kid gets a 64, I'm giving him a 64 on the report card. That's it. And I've walked by some of their classrooms and they'll be teaching like just blah, 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 and the kids are like laid out on the desk. And these guys don't care because their whole attitude is,
Right.
I'm giving you an education.
Right.
Take it, take it. If not, you know.
Right. Well, as you're talking about that, part of me wants to say, all right, yeah, like lead a horse to water kind of thing. But then I also think about adults certain adults would be so thankful of a teacher that drew them in. They weren't interested, and that teacher got them interested because you're so young, and even at like 17, 18, you think you know everything, right? And maybe you think you don't need it and this and that, right? And so, yeah, you could take that attitude like, all right, that person's making that decision, but they're so young to make that decision, you know? And so I think it is nice your attitude of like, you're offering it, but you're doing a little bit of selling, and you're trying to draw them in. And maybe you'd have students who are like, I'm so glad Mr. Geno did that because I became interested. That's when I became interested, So I think that's really nice.
I think I raised a philosophical question with teachers, and it was centered around, do I give them a pencil or not when they come in?
Oh, God.
Because
That's great.
Yeah,
this
about
gets
right.
to a deep philosophical question because if you give them the pencil, then they become conditioned to ask for the pencil, and then they come in, they don't have a pencil. Or
Yeah.
do I just not give them a pencil? But then what happens? They don't do any work.
Yeah.
Uh, and so uh, that's like, so I think I'm somewhere in between. Like I give them the pencil, but I let them know with a like kind of provision, like this is not
Yeah.
happening tomorrow, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Well,
That's really funny. You are reminding me of specifically of a teacher who would not give the pencil, but what he would do is he would say, "Listen, so the corridors. This was junior high, and there was A wing, B wing, C wing, and some of the other corridors had names. And he was like, I'm not giving you a pencil, but if you go to B wing, people always drop their pencils in B wing. Just
Mm.
walk and get a pencil from the floor, and they'd run out and they'd come back with the pencil. It's really funny.
yeah.
That's
I had the privilege of working with Joe as a colleague and also in an administrative capacity, and having been probably in his classroom 1999 all the way through like 2012 or 15, whatever, 2014 or 15,
Mhm.
and seeing Joe as a teacher, both in these stages of like, what do I do now? I was in Borders bookstore yesterday, and now I'm in a classroom, and what the heck is going on? And kids are like punching each other, and his mind being blown. And then also seeing him teach like uh, the University at Albany college courses, and like draft curricula, and like take on this leadership role. And it's interesting as I got to see it before he was a teacher, his early stage, and in every stage, except for the last maybe 8 to 10 years, and or 7 years, whatever it's been. And it's amazing because I can't wait to read this book, Joe, because it's like
Mm.
it's a culmination of like what you've learned, and honestly how you've become successful, because it's not an easy journey. And but I'm fascinated because you have a chapter in this book about when to know to retire.
Mm.
And and you seem like you're at a point right now where you've had to learn the hard way, sink or swim, and now you were striving, and now you're thriving. And why not keep it going? Is there a
Yeah.
point when you're done, or when
Well,
it's
I'm kind of excited. I'm excited about that potential new chapter. I I don't
new chapter being
30
retirement?
years 30 years will be enough, I think, even though I will be at my best at that time. But I can, and what I learned from COVID when I had a lot of time to myself, like, wow, I was getting into woodworking, I was exercising, writing books. Like, I think it's important that when you do retire, like, you're not sitting on a couch. You
Mm.
are, you, even though you're out and don't have a job, you still have to work at something. You still have to be involved in community. Um, so I think I see myself doing maybe a few different part-time type things. Um, and you know, I feel like I'll be more motivated than ever. I'm definitely not going to be lazy. It's just that I'll take a new direction because, um, 30 years is long enough. And
Well,
man,
how do you know when to retire is my question, because you
you
have been there 30 years, or
know,
in your case, right?
yeah. I
40
mean,
or 32? No.
no, at 55, I'll have 30 years and I'll be able to retire with a full pension. Um, so like financially, I'm gonna be great. But the thing is, my wife will still be working for like another 5 years. Um, and my kids will just be starting high school, so there'll be a stay-at-home dad aspect to this. But um, I just see a lot of benefits to retiring in terms of deepening my relationships with others, friends that you know, school takes up so much of my time. Like my commute is crazy. I leave the house at 6:30 and I get home at 5:36. So I'm basically going about 12 hours a day with the commute and everything. And I just think about all the things I can do with that time. Um, and like I want to do out of state hunts and stuff like that. I can't do that with my schedule now. I actually have they actually gave us 7 vacation days, so I actually can do that for 1 week, but um I'm looking forward to kind of doing that, like doing different things, recreating myself. That's like because,
Yeah.
Joe the teacher
Well,
for a long time.
you have a chapter in your book called The Myth of Retirement. Why is it a myth? Is it because, like you're saying, is you can't just shut off? You got to continually keep learning. Is that what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people build it up in their minds as retirement is something where you can just sit around. You don't have to do anything. You're free from responsibility. Um, but you have to be. There's a danger there because you can not get lazy, but you can get complacent. You can lose purpose.
Mm.
That's the big part. Is like you still have to find purpose. And I think I've talked to some people that have retired recently, and they struggle with that. Like, all right, you're out of the building, but what group are you a part of now? And
Hmm.
okay, you're not doing a lot, but what are you doing? You got to do something. You can't just sit around. And you have to, you held a certain position, a certain degree of respect, but now you're retired, you don't hold a position. So, I think maybe
Yeah.
people struggle with their identity, like in the
Yeah.
retirement.
You
Uh,
know, out of 227 teachers, 18 guidance counselors, I think when a lot of them would retire, I'd say a good one out of every four of them would come back to teach what we called F status in New York City, one
wow.
class, two classes, for
Hmm.
that
Wow.
same thing. Yeah, to
That's
stay.
really interesting.
Yeah.
Well, one of the unique things I think with teachers, and you get this with police officers, firefighters, you're retiring, but you're still pretty young,
Right.
and I think that's a key thing, Joe, that you're kind of going through. And you brought up identity, and that's really important too. A
Mhm.
lot of adults don't realize that you still go through shifts in identity as an adult. Everyone always thinks, oh, the whole identity thing happens as a kid, and then you have your identity and you're off. But you keep going through shifts as an adult. They just, may not be as quick as a kid. And so one of those is, this sort of retirement and finding purpose later in life, um, as you move, from a career into something else. And you are young enough to actually have a second career if you want, or just do a few little things. And you're someone who writes, so you're working on a craft. And if you're doing woodwork, that's a craft, that's something you can continually get better at. And so this is all great advice, a great, I think, conversation, and maybe to sort of start to transition to ending the episode. Um, when you look at like police officers, firefighters, like some of them are retiring in their 40s,
Hmm.
and that's then you have all this time, right? So what do you do? So I think you're bringing up a great topic there. So
Yeah.
as we move toward concluding, is there anything else that you would add? Because I think just your nature. You talked about rigidity, and you don't have rigidity. I've never known you to have that. You go with the flow kind of person, but you talked a little bit also that you have a competitive nature. So
Mm.
you did want to succeed. So you went in there, you got dropped in there, like Pete said, your boarders books one day there, and you're in the classroom another day, and you're struggling, but you're gonna win. You're gonna figure that out, right? And you
Mm.
did,
Mhm.
but it wasn't through rigidity. It was through, I think, your flexible mindset. And 26 years later, you're not burnt out.
Yeah.
So any sort of last minute advice, anything else about from the book, anything else that you would say to teachers?
Yeah. Um, well, I think one thing is I'm going to end up doing 30 years in a profession I never intended to be a part of.
Yeah.
It kind of speaks against this whole idea of like doing what you love. Um, uh, because, well, maybe what you love, you're not really, maybe it's not what you think it is in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, and, I'm happy to have, s- got into this profession. It wasn't the classroom was my natural environment, but maybe not this level. But it was fine. Like I worked with a lot of good people, including the students. I got a lot of great students and teachers, and over the years, so the relationships were good. I thought like my work was noble. Um, this whole idea of giving. So I just read a book by this guy Scott Galloway, who was a NYU professor of finance, and he had a message of like maybe people are too focused on following their passion, doing what they love, and maybe they should really work on what they're good at, and
Mm.
then the love will come later, right? If you're like especially good at something, and so that's one thing in terms of like choosing a career. But I'd like to finish just with a poem. I wrote a poem in this book, if I might. Um, and the poem, not ironically, is called Lesson Learned. The book, the podcast, we're bringing it all.
There's so much synergy.
All right, let's see. Here's a poem called Lesson Learned. In all the lessons I taught, a lesson was learned. It is a lesson that can't be given, only offered and received. The list of tasks endlessly go on. We are all awaiting that final bell to be rung, and much must be done. We are born with an assignment to maximize human potential, to build relationships, to prepare for the future. And in that preparation, a lot can be practiced, but little can be predicted. The lesson taught me how to be a better parent, made me understand child psychology, where to place my expectations, when to scold, when to encourage, when to show pride, how to build somebody up, how to leave them to their devices, see the application if the lesson was learned. The lesson taught me the meaning of wealth and something greater than wealth, time. Life being a series of continual moments never to return. You savor them the most when you feel their absence. When you close that classroom door for the final time, like you're closing the door on 30 years of your life, the lesson continues, not knowing what was learned until some test came, with no paper or pen to contend with, only concepts and ideas that you had to think on your feet. You learn the lesson wasn't about how to think to answer a question. It was about how to think. It's the only place, it's only from that place that you may take your seat and begin. That's it.
That's fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. This was great. So the book, Lesson Learned, Joe Geno, it's coming out soon, and you can like get it on Amazon. You can like where else can you like?
Yeah, I'm sure it's going to be on there by Thanksgiving.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right,
So,
excellent,
24.
nice.
all
Well,
right.
congratulations on writing it, and it's. I look forward to reading it, and I appreciate you joining us and teaching us all those lessons. All right.
All right. Thank you.
There's a lesson in here somewhere, Joey.
Great seeing you guys. Thanks.
All right. Until next time, thank you everybody for joining us. We'll see you next time.